Hey, welcome to Creative Block. I'm your host, V. I interview people in creative industries about their life, work, and hobbies while we doodle jam. I asked people on Twitter if they had specific topics they wanted us to discuss, as well as some drawing prompts. Also, we just started moving to Instagram, so you can also ask for prompts on Instagram now. And today with us, we have Aminder Dhaliwal. Hi!
Hello.
I
I
realized
gotta
I
get
had
to your energy level.
yeah, that's why I do the little intro, and then the guests could kind of like get in the group. I realized I had never said your last name out loud before. I read it in my head a million times. Is that
I
is that
didn't even
slightly
hear you.
correct?
I didn't actually even hear you say it, so it must have been right. Like I feel like I would have remembered if you'd said it wrong. Yeah, it's Dollywall.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, it was very close to what I said. Oh my gosh, when I anyway. I feel like for both of us, like, because we have like foreign names. So yeah, when someone like
How do you
says
say
it right.
your last name?
The thing is that like French is tricky because you don't say the last letters most of the time.
Right.
So it's just Bria. And a lot of time it's like people will be like Briat. And then
Yeah,
I'm
I've
like,
been butchering it. I'll have you know.
it's okay. It's okay because when I will say Briats for people to like write it down because sometimes like I don't know when you're like at the DMV or whatever you want to help them out a little bit, right? Like
Right. Oh, I feel like,
um
yeah, my hands have like, and when I'm in my wallet, like, and someone's asking for my name, like for an order, like my hands know like how to get a card and like show it to them so that they have the letters in front of them. I'm nervous for the other person because I'm like,
right.
they're under the stress of having to spell my name. Like, I gotta help them out.
Exactly. No, I know exactly what you mean. That's why I'm like really happy that like when it was in middle school that I came to the US for the first time and someone was like, "Oh, I'll just call you V." And I was like, "This is genius." And now I just can do like the peace sign. And I'm like, "V." And people are like, they get it. And I'm like, "Yes.
I didn't
Problem
realize
solved."
that. It was born in the US. Wow.
Yeah, I don't have you always were you like born and raised in Canada?
I was born and raised until I was 11 in England.
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved to Canada when I think I was turning 11. So, like, yeah, for the first 10 years of my life, I was in London and then moved to Canada for the next 10 years of my life. And then now I've been in the US for 10 years.
That's crazy. So you've had like a third, right?
Yeah. I think it's like officially going to be like the US will now be the longest. So it's kind of nice to have a little bit of everywhere, but it's also like now I'm starting to forget. Like I'm just old enough that like my childhood seems like someone else's story to me. And so I'm
Yeah.
like just starting to forget certain things.
Oh,
I
that's
also feel
really
like I have no claim to being able to like say that I'm like British, like because I haven't lived there in 20 years. So like I have the passport, had the citizenship.
yeah, that's something that's really interesting because like with a couple friends and I, we were like talking about what does it mean to be like a citizen and like because applying for citizenship and stuff like
Hmm.
like I guess you've gone through that as well, but like I like had to apply for a visa to work here in the US and then
Hmm.
applying for the green card and all that jazz. And I feel like, when you start like going through that process, that's kind of like the moment when, at least for me, like I was like, what does it mean to do like citizenship? What does it mean? And then I started looking at all the different because one of my friends is Australian. One of my friends is American. Well, I have lots of American friends, but like it was like the American, the Australian, and the French. It sounds like a joke, right? And then I was like, what are the requirements for each different nationality? It's so crazy. It's so different from a country to another.
I mean, I know that feeling of like the visas to like work in the US. And like I remember the moment where like I was getting on a plane. I had just like got my like first visa and like I could see a squirrel in like the tree outside of like the airport. And
Mm-hmm.
like in my head, I was like, that squirrel can go anywhere it wants to go. And I was like, I'm a human and I need a piece of paper. And like it just felt so like it just felt like so interesting to see and to kind of for a moment just like be inspired by like nature and its like freedom
Yeah,
and feel so stuck as a human. Even though I was the one getting on this metal bird to go to another country.
I know, right? That's so crazy when you think about it. But then again, it's like when you really look at these like paper slips that they used to give us on like the airplanes, and they're like, "Are you bringing in seeds or invasive species?" And you're like, "Well, maybe even they have that kind of paperwork too, I guess." But
I can't believe how often when I've been asked, am I bringing in anything? I'm suddenly like, I don't know, am I? And I get
yeah.
so like scared that I have seeds in my pocket or something. I don't know why I would have seeds, but whew, that fear.
Oh my gosh, it's so real. It's too real. I know exactly what you mean. Um, like I want to kind of bring it I don't have a good segue, so I'll just like get right in the meat of it. But how did you kind of what was your relationship to art growing up? Did you kind of always know you wanted to draw and or write? Because I think that's what's really interesting with you is that you're an artist and a writer, and I feel like sometimes people tend to kind of like have a dichotomy of the two. It's like you're either an artist or a writer, but like with you've published two comics, you're currently working on a very like word-based story right now. So
I like that description of it. I mean, even just that description shows like the difference in, you know, how we see different kinds of authors, right?
right.
Like I remember when I published my first book, I had a family member who, or published my first comic, I had a family member who said like she had read it, but when she said read, she was like she did like bunny ears,
Oh.
because she didn't know if she was supposed to say like that use that word, and I was like, oh, it's like it wasn't like she was trying to mock me, but like definitely
Mhm.
like she didn't know the correct vocabulary
Yeah,
to
yeah,
like talk
yeah.
about comics. Um, but so your question was like how like my kind of childhood and how I got into kind of comics and or just got into art, right? Like
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like broadly, kind of like did you kind of always like it? Did you pursue it? What was kind of like your yeah, your relationship with it growing up?
yeah, so I think I was always artsy. I think I very quickly took on the persona of the art kid. I feel like that's a lot of artists that they like kind of take over this role in their classroom maybe as like the one who can draw. Unless
Mhm.
like for there's every now and again you hear about someone who went to art like an arts whatever elementary school or something. I'm like, I don't know what that must have been like, because my personality as a kid when I remember back is like that was that I could draw. Like I don't know if I had more of a personality. I was like the one in the class who could draw, and I took so much pride in that. That was my entire identity. Not to say that I knew from that moment that that was something I wanted to get into. I
Mm.
was just happy to be accepted in that way, that I was like my creativity was loved by my friends, that like if
Mm.
someone had an idea for something, I was always willing to draw it, or you know, people wanted me on their group projects because we would have like a good you know, whatever, something to put up, like we would have a good
Mhm.
handout, you know, and it had like fun
Yeah.
pictures on it. So I kind of sank into that role, but I hadn't thought about it as a career for most of
Mhm.
my life up until I was kind of graduating from high school, and I had kind of taken everything. I had allowed myself to be open enough that when I graduated from high school that I could take whatever I wanted.
Mm.
I there was some part of me that was holding on to this belief that I might go into medicine, and I
Mhm.
don't know if that was just culturally or if I really thought that I could do that. But I had taken whatever I needed to have the prerequisites.
Oh,
But
interesting.
in my
Yeah.
heart, I do think like art was it just felt so me, and I lived in a predominantly brown area where most people were going into medicine. So I don't know if it was also just the effect of all those people around me made it feel
Mm.
like that's what I should be doing too. And then also made me feel special because I was good at art in a sea of people who were very science heavy.
Mhm.
So eventually I decided that I wanted to do graphic design, and
Mhm.
that was entirely based on the idea that I knew that that was an art job. I had never really heard of other art
Yeah,
positions.
yeah. I see what you mean. It's kind of like, oh yeah, this is a career. I can get a desk job if I do graphic design. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like my entire basis of what careers existed at that age was like movies or like, and I feel like graphic designers was at least like a role I had heard of, or like everyone in every romantic comedy like worked for a magazine or something, and I was like, I guess
Mhm.
those are jobs. um So I applied for graphic design at a lot of places, including Sheridan College, where which was maybe just like a half hour away from where I lived.
Mm.
And I took my portfolio there, and it was like a pretty broad portfolio. And when I got there, they had an open house, and they had um, this animation talk going on. And I walked in, and um, there was just this like great discussion about everything you could do in animation, and also just how silly it was. Like I
Mhm.
felt like this part of my life looking for like what my career should be had felt so serious for so long. And I went into this talk, and they're showing cartoons, and I like everyone's laughing, and we're also talking about the seriousness of it. And it was just like this vibe that I really loved, because I at that moment knew that that was exactly what I had wanted to do, and I had never had a word for it.
Mhm.
And it finally felt like, oh, this is what it's called. Okay, now I know. And that was the moment I then changed everything. And I spent an extra year working on a portfolio to get into Sheridan Animation. And I'm so glad I did that. Now, on top of like what you were asking about like writing, is
Mhm.
I was always like a reader.
Mm.
When I look back at all my old school reports and everything, like again and again, I see like the teacher being like, Aminder likes to read in the back of the class and sit by herself. Like, um, I again didn't really put together my interests with a job for a very long time. There was a lot of
Mm.
like a lot of my life, I think I lived thinking about external pressures. Like, I think you're
Mm.
supposed to do this. I think you're supposed to go into this, and you're supposed to get these grades.
Mhm.
And if I look back now with hindsight, I'm like, well, I was doing all the things that I now do today as my career. I was drawing all the time. I was
Mhm.
reading a lot. And I just didn't put together that you can just do what you like.
Mhm.
And that
Mhm.
kind of came late to me. But it took me a while to get my confidence in writing. And that I think is in part that when I studied animation, we didn't really learn writing.
Mhm.
And by the time I got into a career, um, it felt so distant from drawing. It felt like a
Mhm.
completely different, and it is a completely different career, but it also felt really foreign and far away and had its own language, that it kind of started to intimidate me, until I got to do more board driven stuff. And then I was like, oh no, like this is just, it's just another language to be creative. And so it
Mhm.
was nice to get to try a little bit of both of them in becoming a writer later, and then, doing directing as well.
That's so cool. I love that you seem like you weren't like reading a ton of comics, like you were reading mostly books, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And what kind of was it, like kind of like school curriculum or just kind of like any kind of book that you could get your hands on?
Yeah, I came to you like latched onto that really quickly. I came to comics really, really late. My first kind of real comic experience was Persepolis, where I
Yeah.
didn't realize that comics could be that.
Hmm.
I hadn't really been I knew about the Batmans, the Spider-Mans, and
Hmm.
I had seen those, and the art was like always incredible, but they also felt really, really uh I just felt like you got to catch up on 50 years, so there's a lot going on there. And
Right.
the same
Yeah.
was with like for me, manga had kind of that same feel where like sometimes like I would pick up a book and I'd be like, well, here's volume 32, and I'm like, am I ready to like read all the rest? It just felt like so much.
Yeah.
um but yeah, Persepolis was my first real experience of what you could do with a comic and how serious and funny you could be at once. But and
Hmm.
then before that, I had read Naruto, and that was um like a really it was a bizarre experience because I read it in a exchange program where I went to Vancouver, and I was staying in this girl's room, and she had all of the Shonen Jumps, and I just started
Oh,
at
yeah.
night reading them because I hadn't brought any books, and then I got addicted, and
Yes.
and it was a really nice way to binge them without the pressure of feeling like, oh gosh, like, here I go. Like it just kind of happened more naturally because she already had them all.
That's so funny. That's so interesting. Yeah, because I remember reading on your Instagram profile like way, way back, even before you posted Women World, you posted this like little 10-page comic that is very like, I don't know, it's like very anime coded, but in the uh how do you say it? Like I'm looking for mise en scène, kind of like the
Oh, like
like
maybe
the
tone.
yeah, like the
I
direction
think
of it. Not the drawings are not anime, and it's just like the campiness of it felt very anime. I don't know if you
you're
know.
totally right. You're like, because yeah, that one. So I can kind of go into that a little bit.
Yeah.
So my comics journey started when I got like my first big rejection in animation. And I feel like everyone in animation has to go through that moment where like all
Hmm.
your dreams kind of suddenly crumble. And I had been in a development deal for like years, and I felt like after I got my rejection, I felt like I hadn't made anything in so long and nothing that could be shared. And so I was just like, I just want to get back to drawing. I just want to remember what it feels like to create something without the pressure of like a giant corporation behind it and an NDA or
Yeah.
anything. And
Mhm.
so I started with this like really simple premise. So the first comic I did was because you're talking about my second one, but the first one I did was called Henry Peter,
Oh,
and it was
right.
yeah, it was like a play on Harry Potter, and it was about this boy who finds out, this wizard who finds out he's a scientist. And it was just like 12 pages, and the only thing I told myself was, you're going to make a page every single day. You don't know where the story's going, but that's the catalyst, that this
Hmm.
boy finds out he's a scientist, and it's parody, so that kind of makes it easier to just
Hmm.
like ease into the designs and knowing what vibe you're going for. And literally all I promised myself was one page a day, and post it because it's real shit. So like, get over yourself, it's fine, just post it online. And it was really, really nice to get into like the zone and just like start literally posting every single day and removing the pressure. And then, so when
Yes.
I finished that, I started on a second one, and I followed the same format. I was like, okay, that worked. Like, I didn't feel like I had to come up with this giant story. So let me do another parody. And so this one was a parody of Death Note.
Yes,
Um,
yeah, yeah, that's what it was. I was like, I was crying. This one was so funny. I think
it was so fun. I'm glad you liked it. So it's called Mild Inconvenience, and it was
yeah.
um a parody where this girl whose name is Dim, based off of light, she finds a book which allows you to mildly inconvenience someone else. And so I knew, like, again, it's a parody, so I knew it had to be a little like manga-ish, but like I don't particularly draw like that naturally, so it was inspired. But like, you're totally right, it was like just kind of setting the scene. It was a playground to kind of like move the sand around in. And then I did that for even longer. I think that was like, I did a page a day for like 30 to maybe 45 days. And it came to an ending kind of naturally. And then by
Mhm.
that point, I actually felt like making something bigger, because I had finally gotten into a trend. And
Mhm.
then so my next one actually ended up being Woman World.
Mhm.
But like that's where it all kind of started, was just like, I need to get back into doing this, and this is like an easy way to get there. And I didn't at that point know that that would, result in like a publishing deal or anything like that, like, 3 ideas down the road. But I just wanted to very kind of like slowly get back into making things for myself.
This is so great to hear because I feel like for a lot of artists in animation, especially people who got into animation like thinking like I'm gonna have my own show, I'm gonna create this great idea, I'm gonna revolutionize animation. Like there's a moment you have to
Yeah,
like
I had my hand
realize
up for all of those, by the way. Like I was that person. Yeah.
you and I
I am the messiah animation needs. Yeah.
exactly. And I mean, I feel like you have to have that attitude a little bit if you're going into animation, because it's kind of like it's like it's a competitive industry. It's kind of hard. So if you don't have a little bit of like this,
I mean, I think you need an ego. I actually
yes.
really do. Yeah.
Yeah. I was looking for the word, when you're
Like a little delusional.
delusional. Oh my God, that's exactly what it is. So yeah, I feel like you have to be a little delusional when you go into animation at the beginning, because it's hard. It's hard, and you have to be like, I could do this, right?
Yeah, I think you need to when you like come into entertainment, like that is you need to be starry-eyed. You need to have big dreams and big hopes. And even now, as an older, more experienced artist, I love meeting young artists who like have that uh, just like that feeling that they can also do those big things because they might be able to, but maybe I'm just sounding like a vampire, but I feed off of that
Yeah.
energy. Like I love it. Like I love seeing just the purity of it, I guess, like just the hopes and dreams that they come in with. It's wonderful, and like you really need that energy to kind of keep this machine churning, because if it was all running off of how jaded slowly people become,
Yeah.
it would not be going anywhere fast.
Yes, very relatable, very true. I really like that insight. And I feel like it's funny because we all kind of like think we can do it within animation. And I feel like a lot of us who end up making comics kind of come into like that um like through the back door making comics. I kind of like, yeah, like, oh, I'm spending so much time doing storyboards and all of the stuff I can't share, and it's like taking so much of my day. Or like I want to like have a little bit more of a voice, but I'm not a writer on the show, so there's only like so much that I can uh bring to the episode. So having kind of like all of this creative energy that isn't really going anywhere, I feel like comics is such a great outlet, especially now that we have social media, and social media is like so great to just be able to put stuff out there. Like,
Mhm.
because how do you feel for you? Like, when did you notice a little bit your following or like the interest peaking in your comics? Because I'm sure it must have been like quite a ramp up at some point, right?
Yeah, so for me it was when I started posting Woman World. I guess for anyone who doesn't know, Woman World is a graphic novel I published in 2018 with Drawn and Quarterly, and it follows this group of women in a world in which men have gone extinct, but it's very slice of life and just like their daily troubles. Um, and I started that as an Instagram comic pretty I think like just a couple weeks after the 2017 Women's March.
Mm.
And I like had just come home with like a couple ideas after having seen all these signs that said the future is female. And I was just like, oh, it'd be like kind of funny to do like this comic. And like I like I think I sent a text to like a couple of friends, and which actually ended up on the last page of the graphic novel of like, hey, here's an idea I have. And that was Woman World. And so I started posting that online. And I think at that time, again, I was coming off of that small zine, Henry Peter, and then Mild Inconvenience. And I thought this was going to be another like, 12 pager, just a couple comics, kind of
Mm.
brainstorm. And then I started getting a following, and it happened like fairly like fast, where I think it was kind of a zeitgeist thing where like it's something you can never quite predict, is just like
Mhm.
how something will hit culturally. So I think it just came out at the right time where people started sending it to their friends. And I
Mhm.
was watching the madness on my end where I could see the stats, like how many people were sending it to others, how many people were just tagging friends in the comments. And
Mhm.
I started like getting followers pretty fast after that. And I saw this, I guess, void for like this type of comic out there that I guess didn't exist. And and the other thing is, which might be interesting to people, is that this was maybe just a few months after Instagram introduced carousel. So before this,
Interesting. Oh
so
yeah.
yeah, like that's when webcomics really took off on Instagram. So again, like
Yeah.
I'm sure like, ideas themselves matter, but also it's very much like of the moment, right? Like the distribution mattered as well. So
Hmm.
I was able to use that format, and suddenly like there was a reason for someone to stop and like now see what the next panel gave you. Because a lot of webcomics up until that point had been the 4 panel
Yes.
one post on Instagram. And so it was really fascinating to watch this audience start to come in. And I just kept posting more and more. And
Mhm.
100 comics later, so roughly, because I was posting twice a week, that was a year later, I was like, I think I got up to 150,000 followers, and I was like, wow, like I was not expecting this.
Mhm.
And I knew I was kind of done with the idea in that specific format. And so I decided to kind of start looking into self-publishing,
Mhm.
which when I looked it up, I was like, oh, this is like really hard. I don't know how people
Yeah.
self-publish. I kind of get it for digital, like but like ebooks, I
Yeah.
get it, but for comics, like like you want people to hold them. Like it has to be physical. It's
Yeah.
just so much more enjoyable when you get to hold it in your hands. And so then I started thinking about going with a publisher, and one of the benefits was that I had been entrenched in animation for so long that I went into publishing completely blind, and I was just like, like, let's see what happens. I had nothing to lose. And
Yeah.
so I
Mhm.
started with like Googling Drawn and Quarterly, and they were like my favorite publisher.
Mhm.
And I went to their website and they had a submission link, and I was like, well, all right, like let's go for it. And I sent them a link to my comic, and then they like responded a week and a half later being like, let's make a book. Um,
Wow. So
I
cool.
yeah, I kind of just like fell into publishing and comics kind of like backwards from there. But I also think you were talking about how like we kind of go to comics as like this release from
Mhm.
animation. And I totally agree with you. Like I really love animation. But it can be exhausting to also like work in the thing that you love.
Mhm.
Animation has kind of broken my heart a few times.
Mhm.
Um, and development especially can be really hard. Like I used to be critical of TV shows like when I was younger, and now I feel like anytime I hear someone being critical of anything, I'm like, do you know how amazing it is that anything ever even gets made? Like I just like I'm defending everything all the time.
I know exactly what you mean. I feel like yeah. It's so crazy because
There's
sometimes, it's funny that you say that because I at first I was like, well, you just gotta have a great idea, and then you go in, your idea might be great, but then they're like, well, we have something too similar, we have like this and that, we don't know you enough, you don't have enough credits, da 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 da. So you're like, well, I'll just get all my credits, and then you get the credits, and they're like, still, and then you're like, well, maybe I just need to be buddies with all the execs, and then even when you're buddies with them, they're like, I love you, love your stuff, but I have bosses as well, and you're like,
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Like no one, I think from the outside realizes the randomness of it all, the luck aspect of like,
Yeah.
were you in the right place at the exact right time with something a company wanted? And I agree. Like I thought it was hard work. Like that's what like
Yeah,
it
yeah,
sets
yeah.
you apart. And it's like, no, everyone who doesn't have a TV show is also working really, really
Yeah.
hard. Um, so it was kind of exhausting being in a system where so much of it's out of your hands. And I also think that's like one of the greatest aspects of animation is that it's a team job. Like it kind of feels like being in an orchestra, I guess, like it's like
Yeah.
everyone has a position and you're all trying to make something together and pass it off as if one person made it. And so there's this like great beauty in following a vision.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and then the exhausting half of that is also that it's like it can be quite frustrating if there's, if you really wanted a solo when you're in the orchestra,
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm.
you don't want to ruin maybe I'm forcing myself into this analogy too much, but you don't want to ruin the song you're already playing. And so you need to start doing something in your spare time to just kind of,
Yeah.
again, like kind of the ego thing, like you need to quench
Yeah.
that need to make something that's your own voice. And so they both have their darknesses. Like it's in animation, I also felt like sometimes I was hiding. Like I felt like there were so many great people around me that I wasn't sure if I was good or if I was actually just like great at hiding and letting other people shine. And so making comics forced me to like actually see if I was worthy, I suppose, of
Yeah.
what I hope sometimes others are in animation. And it was hard to make something on my own. And I mean, sure, you know this, considering you're also like in comics, it's exhausting. But
Yeah.
it's also really freeing and just really it's
Well,
a
and
yeah.
also, I mean, I'm just really happy you agreed for the podcast and stuff because you've been like a huge inspiration for me. Like seeing you posting Women's World, and like I was like, "Whoa, this is like so cool!" And like Aminder can be in animation and also be successful in comics. Like I always kind of had this idea that it was like mutually exclusive, and I don't know. For me, you kind of like looking at your work, I was like, you could do both, and it was just really cool. And also just like I liked just so much how like seeing your comics evolve, like seeing how like at first it was very very like just because I always kind of am looking for artists that are kind of inspiring to me in the way that I approach art. I'm kind of messy. I'm not someone who loves to do like super finished like illustrations. Like I like reading comics or looking at art that isn't extremely polished, that has a little bit more of like a life and like a messiness to it. And I like that your very first comics of Women's World is like, I'm like, the art is like exactly at the right place to serve the idea, and like the idea really shines. And and like it's seeing that it's doing really well as well is like, oh, it's possible kind of thing.
I'm
um
I'm so grateful for you to say that. I mean, because that was a choice. Like Woman World is as simple as it looks because my notion was that like I want to make something, and I've already tried that Henry Peter, which had color, and I had tried Mild Inconvenience, which was way more like a manga feel to it. And I was like, I need to make something that I can actually keep doing. And I
right,
had
yeah.
decided that like, okay, 2 times a week feels doable. And on top of that, I wanted to make the comic style as simple as possible so that if I felt like changing the comic an hour before it posted, I could do it.
Mm.
Because in like forcing myself to draw too finished, and I just don't think it would have served the idea, which was more so that I wanted to get better at joke telling.
Hmm.
Um, and so like simplicity just felt right for that. And there were some comics where I went back and like they were kind of redone within like, yeah, a couple, maybe like a half hour before they were even posted. And it was just nice to be able to do that. It was very freeing. And then
Yeah.
to speak to like I'm so it's so nice of you to say that like I was an inspiration. I also sometimes worry because it can create this like unreasonable standard of like what are people capable of? Like can you work full time in animation, also be making comics on the side? And I think it's possible if you're again like you're making something more simplistic.
Yes.
But some people are I think they're just like on that road to burnout with the stuff they're making. It's when that caliber, when that standard starts getting just like it starts rising a little too high,
Yeah.
that's a little scary for me.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a great thing to talk about because I do feel like that's something that like we as artists, it's like easy to like fall in that trap where it's like oh, like it's getting more popular. I need to make it better and better and better. And sometimes I even see it within a show, not even within like personal art, but sometimes I see like artists like getting positive feedback from their storyboard or whatever they're working on. And then they're like, well, in order to keep that validation coming, I have to make it better for the next pitch. And then they end up in that cycle of like more and more and more, but then there's a moment, you know, we're
Oh
just
yeah.
people, we can't you know, you can't, you know, you can't keep
It's
it.
exhausting. Yeah, I mean it's so amazing when like you see a show get like um you see the caliber of like the crew they've been able to get, and it's
Mhm.
also sometimes scary because you're like, oh no, these people will be like the death of themselves because they're gonna raise that standard with each storyboard. And
Uh-huh.
you're gonna look around and be like, oh yeah, my storyboard's got to be better too, which is sometimes healthy, but is a tipping point where like
Yeah,
then everything starts becoming exhausting.
totally. Yeah. And now that we're talking a little bit about animation, I want to kind of like take it back to you in college looking for your first job and kind of like how that was for you. Were you like in Sheridan when did you just go to Sheridan and like look for an internship, or was it like were you already doing freelance in school? How was kind of like your relationship to getting that first gig or your foot in the door?
Yeah, I was graduating from Sheridan in 2011, and that was the first year I think that Nickelodeon came to Sheridan.
Mm.
And I actually don't know if they ever went back, like, and if I don't think they had ever been before. So again, just to like,
Mhm.
acknowledge the kind of luck of the moment.
Mhm.
They happened to go that year and they were talking about their internship program, which I'm sure you know, like, it's the whole production internship. And
Mhm.
um, I interviewed, and it had nothing to do with our art or like our, putting together a portfolio. It was like very much personality based. And I was such a Nick kid growing up. Like I was such a 90s Nickelodeon kid. And I know in Canada, the Nickelodeon channel actually didn't come until pretty late. So other people didn't know like the history like I knew it. And so I interviewed well with them, and then came out for the summer to do their internship, and I really enjoyed it. Like Nick had a really fun culture, and I think it was like looking back, I'm like it was just such a great place to start. Everyone was so friendly. Um, and everyone was so open to like meeting
Mhm.
up and like giving advice. And so I took the internship, which was I think 3 months at the time, and I talked to a few people. And so I had graduated at this point from Sheridan, and we do our fourth year thesis film. We don't make a film every year, but we definitely make one in our final year. And
Mhm.
so I talked to a lot of people about like, well, how do you get a job? Because I don't know how do you do that part. And there was a lot of great advice. Like one was like, okay, you need to just go tell people like you're like looking for a job, because like I was meeting up with a lot of people, but like I wasn't just saying that. I was kind
Interesting.
of like, making like almost like flirting. I was like just like, making it known that like,
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
around. And so I started being more deliberate and saying like, no, I'm not like going back to school after this internship. Like I have officially graduated, so I'm like ready to work. And then the other advice I got was I showed my film to a couple of people on the production I was working on, and they were like, oh, you need to go show this to people and say like you did every aspect of the filmmaking, because yeah, like I had done everything. And so I started kind of understanding that like I was showing others that like it wasn't even like, I'm not going to pretend like my film was great, but I was showing people I could finish something. Like I
Mhm.
made something from start to finish. It is uh completely done. There's like a coherent story in it. And I was it was more than a portfolio, I guess, at that time. Like I could have probably prepped some more stuff, but like it was enough to showcase just who I was. And so at the end of the 3 months, I had also done a bunch of Nickelodeon tests. some for jobs and some for just like a lot like fun and like getting advice back. So I had also like gotten a portfolio by the end. And I got hired onto the production that I was interning on. And then I also had my first taste of what it's like working in entertainment, because just a few weeks into my first job where I had, gotten my visa, I'd had my moment with that squirrel
Mhm.
and thinking about like, okay, I'm moving countries, had a big goodbye from home, and felt like I was on the start. I was on the precipice of, being the Messiah, that animation, but like, just being like, oh, it's all starting now. A few weeks into my first job, the show got canceled. And
No.
I,
What
oh boy.
show?
So this was Robot and Monster
Oh
back in
my God.
2011, and the entire crew was so lovely and delightful, and the showrunner Dave Presler was so lovely, and it was a really bizarre experience because I don't like I know nowadays a lot of shows are getting canceled, but back then it wasn't as common, especially because they'd gotten picked up for a season two, and I was there for
Mhm.
that. I was the reason they hired because they got a season two, like I got a position, and then it was suddenly taken away from them. And I didn't know that that was possible. I didn't know that it's something that can even happen. I remember being at the meeting where they, get everyone together to say the bad news, and I was like unsure of like if it was a joke at first. Like I was confused. And still remember walking back from like that news to my cubicle and hearing all the other I was a revisionist, hearing all the other revisionists like suddenly start like clicking and like on their keyboard, obviously sending emails out, or like I could hear like people
Wow.
starting cell phone calls and like, kind of just like rushing out of like the area to go talk to someone at a different studio. And I was like, I sat down at my desk and I still had like my revisions that I needed to do open. And I was like, well, I don't know who you call. I don't have anyone else. And I just like kind of sat there in my like confusion. And it
Yeah.
was like really like now, like looking back, I'm like, oh, I guess it was so traumatizing that like after that, the next few jobs I took, I like usually try to jump off early. Like if I had another something lined up, it was more important to me to have a job than it was to do something I even wanted to do. So
Yeah.
like, and I didn't even realize that at the time that it was because my first job had ended like this. Um,
Mhm.
so I did get like I mean, I got another job, obviously. Like, it did all work out in the end. But then there's also this other aspect that, like, maybe no one really talks about. But, like, when a show ends or a show is canceled, like whichever one you want to say, um, all those artists suddenly go to different studios, different other productions, and so your network grows a lot suddenly
Yeah.
overnight. And
Yes.
so I like that crew was so amazing already. That a lot of those people went on to do like really great things. Like I'm trying to think of everyone who was on it, but like I'm pretty sure like so Chris Houghton was on it and like created Big City Greens just like a few years later. Um, Carrie Lau was on that, and like we were
Oh
all
yeah.
revisionists. There were just like a lot of like people who went on to do like these really great things. So I also
Mhm.
think it was like lightning in a bottle of like a really great crew. And it was also like horribly traumatizing way of entering the industry. And I think like I'm kind of now okay with like the randomness of it all, but it took me a while to to get used to like, oh, that's not supposed to happen. That's actually not the norm. That's not what you
Yeah.
should assume.
It's kind of interesting to hear because it is like we are right now as we're recording the episode in a really weird place in animation right now. Because I mean,
Mhm.
people who are listening to a podcast, I'm sure like you've all heard with all the layoffs and all the like cuts and everything. But it's always been an industry that's been kind of like unstable in the sense that when your show ends, like you don't really like you might not be able to stay with the studio because it's like you're working on a show more than that you're working at the studio, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, that
Yeah.
everything is a contract, that like you're
Hmm.
not you are an employee, but like yeah, it's all contract based. It's hard to describe to like your own family sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of funny, and I really relate to that thing that you're saying about like leaving a show before it ends because at least in France it's very 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 contract based as well. Like for some reason So hopefully, I think they fixed that, but I think that's something that we're working on here in the US as well to fix, is that like, because I know there's a shift in the industry right now that's kind of going towards that a little bit, where like instead of being an employee, they're starting to employ board artists like unit in a unit
Right.
based kind of
Yeah.
way, because the orders are getting so short. So it's like, if there's only going to be 6 episodes, why would we hire people as employees? We might as well just get them as freelancers. But then when you're a
Right.
freelancer, you end up, so but that's kind of always been the case in France, where like you would get new contract for every new episode, which is like, it's a crazy place to be, because you're like, you're still going in
Yeah.
the studio, but you're like, So it's always like, it kind of, but then you take the power back, right? And you're like, it goes both ways. It's like, if you're not going to employ me for a whole year just for episode per episode, I'm just going to be looking around all the time for what's the next best
Exactly. Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Especially if you're on a visa, like
Yes.
if you need to do some, if you need to have a job to stay in the country, like it's a lot of added pressure. And like
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
now, like I'm thinking back on it, and I was talking about luck and like my first book coming out, but like I kind of had forgotten that like the other aspect of luck was that I had just gotten my green card, because suddenly I could work um on a publishing deal,
Yes.
and I didn't need a visa. And so that there was also this aspect of like the timing of that. But yeah, you're completely right. The contract side is it's exciting because you get to work on a lot of things. Like my
Mhm.
career has been like I've gotten to do a lot of really cool things all over the place. I was at Nickelodeon, Sanjay and Craig there, Pinky Malinky. I went to Cartoon Network, and I was on JG Quintel's Close Enough, and
Mhm.
then I went to Disney, and it was on the Owl House, and then Netflix, Sony, and then now I'm back at Cartoon Network on the shorts. But like that's me looking back with hindsight of like also like, oh, it's like so great that I got to amass all that experience. But I also know that like when you're on a visa and you're like jumping around, it's like
Yeah.
a lot of it's also coming from a place of fear as well. You're like, I gotta get that next thing, I gotta go.
For real. Yeah. Like, oh my God, I relate
It's
so
also like
much.
so much burnout. Like when I do hear about
Yeah.
like, so I don't even know how many first seasons in a row.
Ah,
But nowadays that's become kind of a norm, right? Like you said,
yeah.
like some shows are 6 episodes or something. So people are jumping from season one to season one to season one. And
Yep.
season one is exhausting. It is,
Yep.
season one is a passion project. You have to be willing to put in long hours. And season two that usually pays off, like you have a world built now. But I can't imagine like how many people are just exhausted right now, because it even just takes you like 5 6 months on a show before you're like, okay, now I get it. Now I know
Yep.
how to draw those characters. I know the feel. I know what notes usually come my way. And oh wait, now it's done. It's bizarre.
Exactly. No, that's something that's like, I wish that was something that was more talked about, but season ones are like so hard because everybody's trying to figure it out. And it's not just the board artists, it's not just the designers, it's not just the directors or even just the showrunner. The freaking studio is also trying to figure out the show. So it's being figured out on so many levels that you have like, the notes are so, sometimes they can be like pretty intense. Like it can kind of
Oh
like
yeah.
touch it like into the core of the show, which is like sometimes like, and so that translates into like, well, we have to rewrite a full act of the episode, we have to
Oof.
rewrite the, and then it's just
We're
kind
gonna
of like,
drop an episode. Yeah.
oh yeah, so tough. But then usually, like you said, like in season two, like not only has the art been approved for the world, but also people are starting to figure out the tone of the show, figure out how like the filmmaking of the show. Is this more of a
Mhm.
flat kind of show? Is this more like of a sitcom, or like is it more actiony? Like all of
Yeah.
that stuff
The show
isn't.
might be out and like they're getting audience feedback now and it might be good. So like the execs have kind of like stopped, with their notes. Like, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like it's so, yeah,
I
so
mean, when I
true.
worked at Disney, I was there when Dana got the green. I was in development when Dana got the green light for the Owl House, and like it was so amazing to get to go watch her like go make her own show. And then I also got this other Disney had a mentorship program at the time that I was part of, and I got to mentor under Dana and Matt Youngberg from DuckTales. And so I got to watch all these behind the scenes kind of meetings and things with Dana as a first time showrunner with an original idea, and then with Matt as like this kind of more seasoned showrunner with an IP. So like that was in itself like a really interesting experience of learning, just how different, and also in some ways how it's the same, like how just what a bizarre experience it is for everyone who's suddenly thrust into that position. And just like how the shows are like, they thankfully come out the end looking so coherent and put together, but it's very like messy in the making of all of these like big animated shows. It's a lot of like hoping for the best and trying your best constantly, while also trying to balance out like a life at home and give yourself enough time to recover. There's no way to prepare for it.
Yeah, that's crazy. I feel like what would you say for you like witnessing like like such two different such different experiences of like Dana, first time creator, original IP, and Matt, season creator with legacy IP. What would you say are like the biggest differences that you would see in the room? Is it kind of like
That's a good question. I mean, I think there was like a instant feeling of like I guess potential feels so different, right? Like Our House wasn't out yet, and like like when a show isn't out yet, it has so much potential, which is a big weight, a big stress to make something under. And then like so I would see Dana behind the scenes, and she's such a stoic like showrunner, and like it was just really fun to watch her, because I also think like me and her, like our personalities are really different. I'm a very much a people pleaser, and like Dana has like this really like I felt like she could command a room with like her quietness. And so it was really like invigorating to get to watch that. And on the other end, like Matt would like felt like there was a kind of like not a slowness in the production because they were like full steam ahead, but also just like this like a slowness in the tempo, I guess, of each meeting. Like they kind of knew what the feel of the show was, and even if something it seemed like was coming up, and was causing a problem, like they had enough confidence in that it'll get fixed. So it was interesting to get to watch the different tempo of each person. I mean, also like, look at that age difference too, right? Like it's,
right.
I grew up like, with like not grew up, but when I was in college, like I think, we're part of that same generation where we got like a very bizarre standard of like how young a showrunner could be.
Yes.
That's actually all the young showrunners are actually exceptions, right? Like most of the showrunners
Yes.
are quite seasoned and older. And so it was like also interesting in a time being like, wow, like the age of a showrunner, it could be like as young as like 25. Like that's now like as a 33-year-old, I'm like, oh my gosh, like that is too much pressure for like someone who's that young. Use your 20s to get as much experience as possible.
Honestly, for real. Yeah, that was the thing. That was oh my gosh. There's so much to say about this, but long story short, it has put a really big pressure on our generation because there were all these headlines about all these showrunners that were like, yeah, getting shows as young as 25. And it's like, your brain isn't even finished as 25, You're like,
Yeah.
and it's like, what? I mean,
There's
that's
so
really
much pressure. Yeah.
yeah, because you're not only just like responsible for a crew of like sometimes up to, I don't know, 50 people, but you're also like dealing with like business people, and that's like really that's tough.
Yeah.
You're like, I guess almost not like a CEO like dealing with stakeholders, but close to it, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. I mean, I remember thinking that that was so normal that I felt behind in where I was in
Yeah.
my career like a few years ago. And like I had to stop and be like, behind what? Like, what am I comparing myself to? Like I had some sort of like kind of like a Mario Kart like ghost version of me, like
Yes.
where he's like doing all these like bananas things like that I'm like trying to catch up to, but like all you can do is be where you are, and so you can't actually be behind. But I am grateful that all of that like jumping around, like not only did I get to see like Dana and how she navigated a big company, how she fought for what she knew was right, the passion she brought. But like I've also gotten to see other show creators like Megan Dong like getting to work
Yeah.
on Centaur World, and like she's really influenced how I see leadership. She has such a like a I don't know how to like a calm presence, I suppose, that
Mhm.
was really lovely to see. Um, JG was really fascinating as well. Calvin and Sean Shallows on that like they ran a
Mhm.
show, and it like there was no sense of like crushing pressure. It was like very laid back and fun.
Mhm.
And then like I didn't work with Alex, but like Alex Hirsch has like been really kind enough to offer me great advice, especially when I was pitching Woman World. He like had this
Mhm.
like I could tell that like, oh, he's just got such an energetic confidence about him. Like you can see
Mhm.
like what kind of showrunner he is. I
Mhm.
think of others like, but like there's comics like Lisa Hanawalt, like I'm so amazed, influenced by her and her
Mhm.
navigating between comics and animation. There's just like a lot of really cool people out there who you get to be inspired by. That is like one of the nice benefits of all these young showrunners. I'm glad I'm not one of them, but like also
Yeah.
like it's cool to see all these have these people around you to be like, wow, like I kind of love all the things these people have made, and they all do it so differently.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I agree. I think it's also really cool to see like yeah, like you mentioned, like there's all these young showrunners, but then when you actually look at the amount of shows that are being made, there's a lot of showrunners that are like more in like their 40s, 50s, and
Yeah.
they've like kind of like moved their way up into show
Hmm.
running. Like they didn't just start show running by being a creator. So
Hmm.
it's really interesting to kind of like look a little deeper into that.
Yeah, I think like
But
just being like extremely online, like
yeah.
in that age of like kind of the early 2010s and being like on Instagram, Tumblr, and like whatever, and Twitter and stuff, like the people who were on those platforms were the young showrunners. And so it kind of created this idea that like, oh, that's the norm.
Hmm.
But no, like when you get into the industry, you actually see how like varied the age really is.
Right.
And it's just like you kind of make this false assumption from what you're seeing online.
And I was gonna say, so you mentioned real fast that you were part of the Cartoon Network Shorts program when you were kind of like going over the different places that you worked at in animation. How did you land into that program? Can you define your role a little bit and kind of like what your experience is like being part of the program?
Yeah, I honestly couldn't tell you exactly how I landed that. But I did get a wonderful phone call asking me if I wanted to be part of it. So I think
Woo!
behind the scenes, like some development execs had like pitched my name in. So it was really nice to get that call. And I remember, being like really interested in being part of getting to Greenlight Shorts. That is, sorry, I
Mm.
should explain what it is. So Cartoon Network has a shorts program, and I feel like it's just constantly running. It's kind of on a hold right now, but like anyone can pitch a short. And then you have this council of artists who
I
look at
love that it's a
everything
cancel.
and absolutely adore how ominous it sounds. And like I kind of wish we were given hoods and like we had to meet only like on Zoom and hooded. um it's been a real amazing experience because I originally went in with the intention of like, oh, there's like so many cool people I know who I think like should have a short, should have like this really kind of stepping stone experience into what it's like show running. And like a short is a really great way of doing that, into expressing your voice, getting to see all the aspects of production. So I went into it with just the idea of how great it would be to get to be part of that, um, I guess, get to be the gate in the gatekeeping process, just like open it wide and let people in. And then when I like have been doing it for over a year now, what I wasn't expecting was how much I would level up. Like just having read so many pitches at this point, like I think we've read over 300.
Wow.
I've like I feel like I've become so much better at telling like how to kind of write up a pitch, how to format things, and like what works and what doesn't. And also just like it was really good for me to like I kind of knew this logically, but like so much of animation or entertainment is like emotional, that like it's been good for me on the other side to see like how sometimes a short is passed on just because it's not right for the place where you're pitching it. Like it has nothing to do with the quality of the short
Right.
itself. It's just not right for where it's sitting. And seeing that again and again has been really like wonderful for me, because I get to go back in my own brain to, my own rejections and be like, it just wasn't the right place nor the right time, but that doesn't say it was a bad idea.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, that's great. I wonder, do you feel like because on at Cartoon Network you worked with JG on Close Enough.
Mhm.
Did you work on any other shows?
No, I didn't. Yeah, it was an interesting way to go to Cartoon Network, since that was an adult show that they were doing
Yeah.
there. It was like this interesting divide. But it was a really cool experience because like they were just trying new stuff. And I'm personally like a big believer that the studios, I guess when they were open and we were all in-house, like they really reflect the kinds of shows that they produce. So like you
Mhm.
walk into Nickelodeon and I feel like everyone's loud and there's a lot of energy, and
Hmm.
it just feels like the show, or like the place that makes SpongeBob. It
Yeah.
feels like the place that makes the Loud House. Like you can just like sense it when you walk in. And Cartoon Network, when I walked in, it felt like quieter and
Yes.
it felt like, I don't know if everyone was like, writing in their diaries, but it kind of felt like every time you'd walk past a cubicle that someone's like writing down their feelings.
That's so
It
true. It's so true. I
was
feel
like
like
a nice experience.
it's a little bit it's a little true. If they were like a clique, like Nickelodeon would be like the jocks and like Cartoon Network is more like the emos or like the
Yeah,
the
the art kids.
D&D
Yeah.
artsy. Yeah.
Oh, totally. Yeah, yeah. So it
Yeah.
was like I really liked going there, even though it wasn't a children's show. It was getting to do something different, but the feel was all the same. So yeah, that was my only experience there at Cartoon Network, and it was a really good experience. And I left on the terms that like Disney was offering me a development deal. Like I wasn't leaving like out of frustration or,
Hmm.
whatever. I was just like, oh, I kind of can't, give up this opportunity. So I need to go. But otherwise
Hmm.
I would have stayed there a lot longer.
Hmm. Yeah, I was asking because I was wondering if you like met any of like the execs when you were pitching or like kind of like, because if that was maybe a way into your like getting to be part of the shorts. It's just so cool that you can like it's so cool because you have like now you have like two books behind you, so it's like you're a writer now, right? I don't know if you felt that ever in your career, that like as you when you were board artist, like if there was like a difference for you getting a book out in terms of like being looked at as like a board artist director versus like a writer.
Oh yeah, I think you're totally right. Like I don't know if I could call it out the same way like when I was in it, but like I do think my how people saw me changed, which was like an unintentional like reaction to making a book. Because I
Mhm.
had never seen myself as one thing.
Mhm.
Kind of when you start working in animation, again, because it's so team heavy, like you suddenly feel the production grind of like every single person has a very specific job.
Mhm.
And you start like forgetting how to do different elements of other aspects. Like I don't remember how to like animate anymore at all. And 10 years ago, I was quite confident in that. And now I can't, I don't even know which program people use. Um,
Yeah.
but like also
Yeah.
my interest wasn't quite there. Like it was always
Yeah.
in writing and drawing. And so I have had the more board driven route, which I think also makes it a little easier.
Yeah.
But there is this distinction, which I think I understand for the production side of the studio, like why they have to do it. But like if I could change everything, like it wouldn't be so distinct, those roles. Writing and storyboarding are so like hand in hand. Writing, storyboarding, directing are so hand in hand, and I kind of wish they overlapped a little more in a
Yeah.
just a more I guess organic way. Even just the fact that we create scripts in a program, you know, which was made for live action. Putting a drawing into a script is like shockingly hard and should be
Hmm.
very easy if you work in animation. But the program is forcing you to only think in words. So yeah, I do think it rebranded me in a really great way. And overall, like in meeting execs, I actually just think I've always just liked meeting people. I was always just curious about animation. I like hearing about the marketing side. I like hearing about
Hmm.
all the stuff that I have zero interest in being part of, but I like hearing about it. Because I think everyone is really good at their jobs, even though it feels like sometimes like it's like, oh, the board artists versus I don't know, the writers, or the board artists versus the showrunner versus the marketing team. Like it can feel like
Hmm.
there's these like secret wars going on, but I also think like everyone is trying their best at the job that they have. It's just the
Yeah.
system is a little confusing.
Yeah.
So when I did go to different studios, I did meet up with each of the development departments. I like knowing yeah, who's like running the department, and also just what their tastes are personally.
Hmm.
And also like I when you get to meet a development exec, it's nice to hear like their purest form of what they wish the studio was doing.
Hmm.
Because they of course have to answer to a lot of higher ups as well, but it's nice to hear like if that was not a problem, what they would be making.
Hmm.
I just find that kind of inspiring in itself, because a lot of those people have like, yeah, really good taste. And they're also really good at telling you like who's worth, Googling right now, who should you be following on Instagram? Because like I kind of fell off of like finding new artists and stuff, and they're really good at keeping up with like who's making some cool stuff. So I also think
Oh.
it's really good to meet them in that way. But and the shorts program, like, let's also just like mention that like you pitched a short and like you got now a green light for a short. So I'd like to see,
Hello.
yeah,
Big
it's
news,
such a great
everyone.
idea. It's been so amazing to see people I know who like, because some people I was poking them to like, make things and
Hmm.
pitch things. And then like someone like you who I know and is like so capable and is like also in comics and is like busy as hell and podcasting, and like he still found the time to like put together this pitch, and it was like an instant yes from like everyone on the council, for multiple reasons, because of you, like, we want to invest in the right people, because of what the actual pitch was, the drawings were so wonderful, and then just like, again, the potential that you hold as an artist and as a creator. There was just so much going for you. So yeah, what's it been like on your end?
Oh wow, I'm getting a question from the guest, everyone.
Welcome to my
No,
podcast.
that's really that's so well. First of all, that's so sweet for you to say all these things. It's kind of funny because as an artist, like I don't know. And you probably relate to that as well, but there's a little bit of like keep your head down and just keep working and then eventually something's going to happen, but that just doing that alone isn't enough, and you do have to do like you just said, like meeting up with people, networking, reaching out, and because I don't know, there's this weird I don't know where this idea comes from, but I had a little bit of this like secret wish. Maybe it's like Cinderella, I don't know, but it's like I'm just gonna keep posting until somebody notices me, and it's like sometimes that happens, but it's so rare, and it's like
Mm.
you have to keep putting yourself out there. And for me, I was just kind of like the way I actually pitched to the shorts program was just because I have been really wanting to get more into writing so I could have so I could do a little bit more of the shows that I really want to work on. I feel like I really love goofy shows with heart. Like Thundercats Roar was like so perfect for me to work on because it was so goofy and so fun. And there's not a ton of shows like that out there right now.
Mhm.
So, and I heard from like the little whisper I know whisper network is not the right word, but it's like from people just talking, because you know a ton of people in animation, so people talk and
Yeah.
they're like, and I heard also from some execs like there's not a lot of people pitching comedies right now. There's not a lot of people pitching cartoony stuff. Apparently we're like in, from what I heard, we're like in a very kind of like introspective dramatic
Mm.
type of like pitching vibe. And I was like, well, that's great. I love pitching cartoons. So I was just like, I have this little thing that was like sitting on the side. I'll just format it into a pitch. And I was just like, we'll see what happens. And I'm trying now, because I used to spend like a lot of time building stuff from scratch, but now I'm trying to be better about like, what do I have that's been like cooking in the back of my brain, and how can I just make it really simple? And I got the pitch, actually, the the little document that you guys put out, the
Yeah.
cartoons with the little pitch from Tig and Seek, which was
Right.
called,
Yeah.
how was it called? We Seek, the original title.
Oh shoot.
Uh, it was similar but a little different. But
Yes.
it was really great because I was like, okay, I'm going to sit down and do exactly what, in middle school. I don't know if in Canada you guys had that, but in the US there's like this way of formatting an essay in a very, very, very specific way.
Right, like MLA or like something. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just like, at the time as a kid, I was like, oh, I hate this. I hate having to like fit into a formula. But now I'm like, oh, the reason why there's formulas is because it helps people communicate when people
Mm-hmm.
know what to expect. Like when they know how the information is coming to them, it helps them understand it. So now I'm like, okay, I'm gonna literally try to copy how Tig and Seek did their pitch, where it's kind of like you start broad, then the world, then the characters, and kind of like, and like the way they describe. So I really tried as hard as I could to do that. And it actually helped a lot, because I was like, because also I tend to be like all over the place. So I was like, okay.
I mean, I can tell you that like kind of like what you're saying, that you understand why there's a format. Like again, like we read minimum 300 pitches last year. That's when you're like, oh my gosh, thank God there's a format, because
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can't imagine reading
yeah.
300 pitches with different formats to them. Like, how do you even compare those? So like, yeah, like I get it from like the kind of just the production side of it, I guess, of like why you need that format there in the first place.
Yeah, and also, like I don't know, for me, like trying to write more, I've noticed like being concise helps get to like the bottom of the idea faster. Like,
Mm-hmm.
because we could all write like 60-page pitches, but then it's like, what am I looking at? Where's the information? And so I understand that as well. Now I'm like trying to think. I think,
Yeah, that one's just for you. That
yeah,
one.
yeah. It's like nice to have like peers. I've also been more engaged with like writer groups with friends,
Oh, nice.
where we like share each other's pitches, and then you can see like, oh yeah, like when they pitch me their idea, that's the moment when I start kind of like having a hard time paying attention, because they're covering details or lore or like stuff that I'm like, I'm not really invested in this right now.
Mm-hmm. I
um
mean, I know it's helped me to pitch something to someone and have them try and repeat back to me what I just kind of said, or like not repeat word for word, but like try and tell me what I just said. And then I'll hear my own words through someone else, and I'm like, oh no, that's not what I'm trying to say at all. And it helps me like discover the right language.
that's really
Because
great
so
advice.
much
Yeah,
of it is just it's the communication issue.
yeah.
Like I can tell sometimes when I read pitches and someone's got something in their mind that they haven't quite communicated on paper, but
Mhm.
they know something that I don't, and it hasn't been communicated. And then you said something about I'm trying to remember how you worded it, but like how you felt like you could just post online and like someone would like notice you.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like
Hmm.
I know that feeling really well as well. Like there's this like I think I like attention, but I don't seek it out. Like I
Yeah,
don't, I'm not an attention seeker, but like I do like it when I have it on me. And
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know
yeah.
exactly what that is, but like some part of me kind of wonders if I like had a fear of rejection when I first started out, that like, oh, if I go out there and I fail, well, it's just going to confirm that like I'm not really good for this. So instead, I'll just kind of stay at the sidelines and show people that I could if they just took a chance on me.
Mhm.
But like yeah, I agree with you. You kind of have to get out there and just start showing people everything, and you have to lean into that rejection. Like you're gonna hear no's, and you got to start
Yeah.
collecting those no's. And those no's often just mean like, yeah, again, like not here, not right now. Not that it's not a good idea. Just it's you have to like start forming this new relationship with rejection. And then on top of what you said, like about sharing your ideas with a group, a writing group, I hadn't realized how much of a perfectionist quality I had, where I would just like hold on to things until I was
Mm.
like it's not quite what I want to show yet.
Mm.
And I had this like I would always kind of think about it like or I'd explain it to people that like I just don't want to get notes on something that I already know isn't working. I
Mm.
like that's why I logically kind of told myself what I was doing.
Mhm.
But when I just started sharing things that weren't working, and also giving people the caveat that like, oh, here, I'm going to show you this outline for this comic I have. Here's the things I think aren't working. Like, I don't think this character's arc is working, and I don't like know about this magic system or something. It was just nice to like give them the top line notes and
Yeah.
then just and hand them something that wasn't working. It was so freeing to get used to that, because you kind of just you have to get over that hump. And
Yeah,
it
and it,
allows you to like, yeah, see what you actually, you know, who you actually work with as well. Like whose notes do you start to appreciate? Like
yeah.
it just you learn so much about yourself.
I agree. And I think also what's really great about what you said is like being able to tell people what kind of notes you're looking for. Cause it's something that I've started noticing in my career, like overall, generally, like especially moving up to like director and going in like meetings that are like a little bit a bigger scale and having people start a meeting saying, these are the kind of issues or notes that we want to talk about in this meeting. So that like limiting the scope of things can like
Mhm.
and getting in that habit of like telling like communicating efficiently in that way is like so great too, because now also like working on a comic and having sometimes like asking people for feedback, I can be like, this is kind of what I want to happen, but right now this is this is what I'm missing. So it could be like either I'm missing a joke or I'm missing a beat or like I'm missing, and then I don't know for how you feel, but for me it helped me build confidence in now writing or like thinking like, well, if I ever were to have a room, like direct a short or like maybe like move up to like supervising, directing, or show running, I feel like I have more tools because just communicating something clearly is like, oh, now we're all moving in a direction that's making things go forward instead of like in circles or.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it seems a lot of times in animation, I'm sure maybe even like live action, like the problems are just miscommunication
Yeah,
so
yeah.
often. And you know that we have this like it's unfortunate because sometimes if you pitch something to someone, they also instantly get a version of it in their head, right? And
Yes,
so then you're
yes,
competing with their imagination,
yes.
which is really, really hard. And so that's when you understand that, like, okay, we need to see things. That's why we need the crappy first drafts, because I can't compete with imaginary or theoretical ideas in someone else's head.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, that's so important. And it's something that I didn't really realize before I started like kind of pitching stuff to other people as well. It's kind of like because before I was like, oh well, it's all in my head and everybody could see that, right? And it's like, no, people don't, they can't look into your mind. Uh Oh yeah, that's so funny. You know what? Let's go into some questions because there's like some really great questions that have been asked, and I think that are that I even wanted to ask myself. So
Sure.
let me pull some up. From our patron Ajax the Abrasive. Do you think that working in the animation industry helped prepare you in any way for writing your own book, or did you mostly draw on your comic experience?
Ooh, hmm. So I guess it's hard to imagine not having worked in animation. It's hard to
Yeah.
predict how it would have gone otherwise, but I learned a lot from animation. I also think those two industries are like I don't know how to describe their relationship. They're like kind of cousins. They're both based in sequential art, so they're related in so many ways, and yet so completely different.
Mhm.
So I learned a lot about production, I guess, just finishing something,
Mhm.
which like I don't know what it must be like if you come entirely from comics to entirely rely on yourself. Like you must have had to place some really strict rules on yourself from like quite a young age. But from animation, I was already like I knew that like something has to be done by a certain date. That means it actually has to be done because in animation it actually like starts getting really expensive if you're late. And
Yeah.
so my publishers were surprised at like how I actually was like following through on deadlines and things like that because it's a lot more like analogous in publishing. Like there's not really any money truly being spent until they're actually printing the books, right? Like that's when you start
True.
getting money involved. And so
Mhm.
I didn't really know that. And I was like hitting every single deadline and like just really I guess surprised them that I was able to do that. So in that way it really helped me. Also getting like a sense of like pacing and storytelling. That all came from animation. Um so yeah, it helped me in a lot of ways that like I'm probably gonna forget. Like, just the fact that in storyboarding you draw so much really prepares you for comics.
Yeah.
It's like really helpful to have been storyboarding for years because you are ready to draw a bunch of like panels of the same character again and again and again for your book. What I wasn't prepared for was how you actually functionally create a book, like what
Mm. The
uh
pages and like how a
yeah, like
page kind of like mirrors another and all that kind of jazz.
exactly, like like how does a gutter work and like how
Hmm.
how does this page have to be, how does the left page have to be different from the right page to account for the gutter, or like at what point do you get like blurbs from like people for the back of your book, stuff like that, like I was all new to.
Hmm.
But I'm glad that like for the big meaty part that like I knew how to make something and actually finish it. All
Yeah.
thanks to animation.
Yeah, like you said, also I feel like animation, like having us draw so much so fast all the time, that's kind of like a great thing when drawing a page. I'm like, now I know, like when I draw a Rodney page, I'm like, oh, I'm not worried about the drawing part. I'm mostly worried about the writing part. Like that's, like, is this
Yeah.
gonna land? Is this gonna be fun? Is this gonna be like engaging for the audience? That kind of stuff.
I always have a huge fear about spelling mistakes. It's like
Oh
really
yeah.
bizarre that I spend so much time worrying about spelling mistakes. I think it's because it's you feel so silly when you spot it. And like it comes usually from something really, really silly. Like I've had an accidental like B or a Z end up in like some text because like I had been switching from the text in Photoshop to like,
Mhm.
to a brush. And like then the B ended up in the text and you just feel so like, oh, how did I not catch that? Like I've read this so many times and I did not spot that. So that keeps me up at night sometimes. The
That's
same way
really
this is like
funny.
it's kind of nice to have my like stress be on something so silly because the
Yeah.
real stress should be on the quality of the work. But I also get that with parking. Like I have pitched at so many studios and I can tell you that like when I was like driving around pitching in studios, my worry would be about parking and I would forget the actual pitch. Like I would be like, that's fine, I've got that. And I'd be like, where's the like the entrance and like how long will it take to get to like the office or like to get to like this area or this building from that lot? And like I was so
Ah!
obsessed about that that it would allow me to just like kind of like free up my brain and not be worrying about like the quality of my pitch.
That's so funny. That's so funny. I love that actually because it's like Yeah, that's so true. Like it's good to have a little thing to distract you, even if it's some extra stress, I guess.
Nonsense. Yeah.
We had some questions from Brother to Drummer and Joe Benson. Love you guys on the Patreon. We have so many good questions though on all the different platforms that I do want to kind of get into the ones that have been asked on Instagram. And I really love that question from heck.xlsx because they're talking about Singe, and they ask, how has the process of Witch's Guide been different from your other comics? And if drawings is your magic, what is your craft? And what's the most interesting thing you've ever found from doing research that didn't actually make it into the final product? So I think that's like a 3-part question.
Oh,
You don't have to
wow.
address all of it, but I thought there was some really cool stuff in there.
Dang, that's a really good question. That's a good three-parter. So how was the first one how my process has changed, like going into
Yeah.
which is good? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It changed a lot. Um, I a Woman World, each thing I've created has built on the last. Woman World, when I finished it, I was like, wow, like I've made a book with kind of a coherent story. And there's like some really light character arcs in there. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it because on a day-to-day, Instagram is like it's just so it's built for one-off comics.
Yes.
And if you're trying to do something arcing, it's really hard. So it was like one of those moments where after Woman World, I was like, am I enjoying the one-off, the slice of life comics, or am I doing it because my distribution model is Instagram?
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I was enjoying it. So when I went into Cyclopedia, I was like, it kind of feels like I get to come up with an idea and then brainstorm all the potential comics around it. And so I approached it in the same way, but I knew that I wanted to add more character arcs and a full like story arc. And I wanted all the characters to have a moment where they all interacted. And so that led to this big moment in the middle where all the characters go to this gallery and they're each like in the background of other comics. And so it was like really fun to craft that world. And at that point, then I had like now leaned into making more of an arcing story. And I knew how to, I had grown confidence in how being able to do that. And at that point, I was starting to get this itch of like making something even bigger. And I really wanted to make like a large world of fantasy. Like I feel like every teenage girl has like a phase where they're obsessed with witches. Yeah, so like I knew I wanted to do something about witches. And I started writing this story in my spare time. And for a very long time, the idea was like it would be a full comic, just like my other stuff. And as I started getting more and more into it, I was like, this would have to be really long to present in the exact same way as other graphic novels. And I was also coming to this conclusion where like I was looking at other graphic novels or just like comics in general, and I was noticing that like there was a lot of redundancy. I like was looking at comics where like one character is giving a speech for a long time, and then there's like 8 panels of the character, and they're just like moving their arms around. And I felt sorry for the artist because it's like like the format requires a certain panel count, I guess, and so you're being forced to create new panels because of the caption. But this might have been stronger rather than having 8 drawings of the same character with their arms moving around, to have one really, really strong, powerful drawing and have like a lengthy piece of text. And so I was seeing how the distribution model, how we had become used to the format of comics, was kind of disrupting the storytelling. And the same for prose books, right? Like I'd read books where like something was being described and it was like sometimes you're like, what's better than a description is if you just had a photo of the thing, like a picture here. That would be like, I like fantasy that you just like have a map in there. That's kind of nice. And there's this thing that happens in prose books where like children are introduced to books with pictures in them, and there's this idea that you're supposed to slowly read books with less and less pictures in them until you're like truly reading, which is like you have a prose book and it's all words, and now you have to use your imagination to picture it all. It seems like, I don't know, it's like, couldn't we just kind of, you don't always have to force the reader to use their imagination. It feels like we're at a point in creating that like these two ways of storytelling, comics and prose books, can meld together to create something new.
Mhm.
And I know there's like been a few like adult illustrated books, but
Oh yeah.
I didn't quite see anything in the market which exactly reflected what I wanted to do. And so I decided like maybe I'll try something out. Like maybe I'll do a chapter and then like, I don't know, maybe I'll use that to pitch a book somewhere. And
Mhm.
hey, maybe I'll realize that like this doesn't work. Like you have to do it
Mhm.
in order to see it doesn't work. But in my head, I was like, text is so beautiful, and we sometimes forget that it's text is a are those are drawings. Like the letters are in themselves drawings, and at some
Right.
point we divided the idea that there's writing and then there's art. But I kind of wanted to meld them back together. And sometimes it is more powerful to just have an image, like the idea that it's worth 1,000 words is true sometimes. And then sometimes it's nice to lean on writing, where images aren't kind of necessary. So I was trying to bring together these two ideas in my head and bring them to this very specific story I had, where I was like, well, this has to be the right story to bring to create this marriage between these two elements as well. So my
Yeah.
process changed quite a bit in that, like, I do have to figure out the art. And I wanted to, again, because it was fantasy, I wanted to make sure it was more tonal and like a little more finished and polished. So I
Mhm.
started inking, and this is in my first comic where like it's inked on paper, which has been really
Mhm.
nice to just get away from a computer screen.
Yes.
So I mean, that may be my answer, what my craft is, I guess. But uh that has been really, really different, in like scanning and like doing all the tone, and then also having a whole part where I then go change the words to have more graphic on them has been part of the process. And so I this book, having had done so many comics already, I didn't start posting it online until I felt ready, like I had
Mhm.
enough kind of to keep going. And now there are times where like, oh, I'm catching up to the where the book is and how finished I am versus where the Instagram comic is. But
Mhm.
it's been quite a healthy push and pull. um and then I think the second part was something about my craft. Was it comics for my
Yeah, I
magic?
was yeah,
Okay.
it's like let me grab it again. So if drawing is your magic, what
Okay.
is your craft?
Okay, great. So this, I love this question because it's based off of my A Witch's Guide. So in
Yeah.
that, the witches have. So I guess for anyone who doesn't know, A Witch's Guide is my third book coming out soon. It's about a group of witches who live in a society where magic is like a commodity and is abused in an economy in which it relies on magic and therefore witches. Um, and so in that, I also have this concept that a witch must use their magic to help their town, but they also have crafts which allow them to kind of gain back their magic. So these are all allegories for like, hey, if drawing is my job every day, what do
Hmm.
I do when I go home and I don't feel like drawing anymore? Because it's really bizarre when you start getting paid to do what you love. So my
Yes.
craft, I would maybe say, is um reading. That like I kind of wish I had something more active, honestly, in my life, because I swear I'm just like a boulder. Like I just like sit in different areas of my house. But that is like my thing that I love to do when I'm not making things. I guess like maybe cooking would be another one, and then like this is maybe too general, but like the literally crafts are also like a really nice way to like get out of your own head. Like I did some paper craft last night, like kind of like origami stuff,
Mhm.
because it's uh kind of very zen. Like I don't know if mindless is the right word, because it's very mindful, but it's
Yeah.
you're not like trying to battle some unknown equation in your head. You're just in the moment. And
Right.
then I think the final part was if there's any research that didn't end up in the book. I'm sure there was. I can't think of anything right now. I think what people might not know is that the world that I've made is so much larger than what's on paper. Just to go back to what you were saying about even
Mhm.
pitching an animated show, like there's a whole bunch of things that just don't exist in this version of the story that I have actually thought out. And sometimes I have to go back and read my own chapters to be like, wait, what do people know? Because I have a version in my head and I don't know if some of those things have quite made it to the page always. So I have to constantly check myself. But I can't think of any one thing specifically.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I love to hear that you have a lot that you have a backlog, because I'm on the opposite end where I'm just like, I don't have any backlog. I'm done. I post. That's really interesting, because it sounds like when you started making comics, you were kind of more in that phase of like draw post, and now when did you start creating a backlog for what you're posting on Instagram?
I think after too many years of going through what you're probably going through, it's really hard to kind of live in that constant grind.
Yeah.
And I have this like, I don't know, these weird rules on myself about like the purity of making things just for myself. I get really worried when it becomes all about hitting a deadline. So I do try and avoid that, because that is a great way of getting things done. It's not the way I want to rely on making things, because it does eventually become really, really exhausting and also kind of addictive. Like you start realizing that like, I'll get it done. Like it'll for sure get done. And then you start pushing when it's even done by. And then it's like a minute before you're actually posting it. And you're like, well, pulled it off. And then you could do that again. And so I was like, okay, I want to like make things, and when I'm making them I don't want to be like, oh, looking at the clock and being like, oh, this has to get done. I just want to have some space. And so I was trying to I guess ensure the purity of that. The same way with like I've posted sometimes and like gotten too into like my audience and being like, oh, what do they want out of this? And that again kind of ruined the purity of it. Same with I have gotten all my book deals after I already started making something, because I didn't want anything to change why I was making something. So I really hold that very, very dear. I wish I had more like actual ways on how to get that done, other than like a lot of planning. I can only tell you like you have to go through the worst of it to realize that like this is not maybe the way I want to make things. And then that'll make you turn it around. Because like that's exhausting.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, like always like being like facing the deadline is tough. But I don't know if you feel that, but in my particular experience, I really like the fact that I can read the comments, and sometimes people will pick up on some stuff that I'm like, huh. And then I'm like, you know what? Let me think about that a little bit. And like sometimes they'll say a thing and I'm like, psh, and I'm like, I'm gonna on purpose do exactly the opposite of what you just said. But sometimes I'm like, this is interesting. What is there that I can kind of I mean, it's not interactive, but I don't know, you know what I mean? That's just like having that feedback.
Completely get that. Yeah, I mean, that's the difference now between like I've read loads of amazing books where like you get to that last page and like I don't know, it's a mystery novel and like the mystery solved, and then you close the book and you look around and like you were in your own world and there's no one to talk to, and like you just like sit in silence for a bit with your own thoughts. And it's really, really, reading is usually actually really lonely. Unless you're in a book club, people don't read things at the exact same time as you. You might talk to someone who's read the same book and like they read it years ago and they don't quite remember what you're kind of latching onto. And so I love the interactive side of webcomics and like getting to see those comments come in live. And I think, yeah, what you're saying is really the healthy way of looking at it. Like Like I see sometimes someone will be like asking a question like, wait, what does this mean? And I'm like, okay, cool, that's like a good reminder that like
Mhm.
that wasn't, it's been too long since that other beat that like people might not remember by this
Right.
point. So like just add in a reminder, because this isn't the final version for me. It's there's a book version that is the final version, and so I just write in a note to myself. So I kind of look at it as I even have it written on my Instagram as like I'm beta testing
Oh,
witch's
nice.
guide, and so everyone who's reading it is part of the beta test, and so every comment does actually matter to me. And you know what? Take like the compliments too. Like some people write
Mhm.
some really nice things that just keep me going. Because you can get to a point where you're like, I don't know why I'm doing this, and why am I
Mhm.
forcing myself to make anything? You know, like the classic, like everyone's like, I'm gonna go buy land and become a farmer,
Yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah.
while having no idea how hard it would be to do that.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's really nice to get the really lovely feedback as well, and just like have people say really nice things. It's a reminder to me as well. Like I don't think I comment on other people's posts enough, and I want always remind myself to like how much it matters when people do that to me, that I need to go do
Yeah.
that on other people's as well.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I feel like even it's true, like even a comment that's just like, wow, that was a banger, like so funny. It's like even though it's like it takes like a second for the person who wrote it, when you like read it, you're like, oh.
Yeah.
Obviously sometimes someone will like go out of their way and post something where they like analyzed what you wrote and drew, and that is the best. Like when someone takes time out of their life to sit there and write an essay about whatever you created, I'm like, wow,
Oh my
thank you.
gosh.
You know what I
Yes.
mean?
When I realized that like I was worthy of someone's time, like
Yeah.
your time is your biggest commodity, and like that someone took time out of their day to put their thoughts together about why something I made matters, I am so honored.
Yeah, like this is honestly like just that feeling like when I don't know, experiencing it once. Now I'm kind of like addicted to it. I'm like, I'll just keep making things until I know it doesn't happen often, but but whenever it does happen, it's like, yes.
Yes, I agree. I totally agree. It's such a good feeling. It keeps you going for a really long time too.
Yes.
I remember I used to make things out of spite sometimes. Like, you get rejected in your day
Yeah.
job or an animation, then you're like, well, like, I don't know what, like, blah, blah, blah. And then you start making something and you're like, whatever. And like, there's spite is like really, I don't know how to describe it, I guess. Like spite is like really powerful, like as a catalyst, but it doesn't
Mhm.
keep you going.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
love, like loving something that you do and seeing other people's love for it as well, is just like that can keep you going forever.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I feel like I don't know, like when you have, I kind of tell people that like it's like when you have like five people who will comment on your thing because they love your characters, then it's kind of like that's what I tell my friends. I'm like, that's all I need, just like five people who like love, because then you're like, oh, I need to keep these characters alive for
Yeah.
them. Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, yes, and that like speaks volumes to it's the quality of like the interaction, right? Like, because
Yeah.
I mean, I remember starting on Instagram, and it was a time there. I think people still do it. Maybe you've done it. I don't know, but like there was a time where people celebrated their follower count. Like you'd get
Hmm.
like I hit 1,000, I hit 3,000. And I never did that personally, just because I was really worried about like celebrating something that was out of my control.
Hmm.
The last time I posted anything about like numbers was like I hit 1,000 posts, and
Hmm.
that to me was really big because it's 1,000 carousel posts. So each of those is like
Yes.
already 10. And that is something that's in my control. Like I made those. So like I like did a little like, wow, I can't believe I did that. But like I get really like worried about like, how many people are commenting or anything that's like out of my control. It's like, no, no,
Yeah.
no. It's like the quality of the interaction you're having with people that matters.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, totally. I agree with that so much. It's like, yeah, just, it's like, I don't know, I love this like corny analogy, but it's the little thing with like people like the when you have to believe in like Tinkerbell, and then like she comes back, and it's kind of like that thing, right? When people like believe in you, you're like, yes,
Yes, I do
okay.
believe in fairies.
Let's see if you like your number one trick for when you get in creative block, what do you do in order to kind of feel better? Doesn't have to be to solve the block. It could be just to make yourself feel better.
Oh, make myself. Well, first of all, I just want to say this is a really great question, and like having listened to your podcast, like I really appreciate whenever this question comes up because everyone has such different answers. And so like I kind of just want to make a compilation for myself of all of them. They've been really great to listen to, and I really have just enjoyed this podcast. For me, I don't know if I have a really any like a good answer. Other than that, like I've kind of learned that sometimes the problem is expectation in a creative block. It's like I'm placing some sort of unnecessary expectation on myself of like where I want to be, or why aren't I like good enough to be where I'm supposed to be in a project, or like in a problem with a specific like comic. Like there's an expectation I'm holding over myself of where someone of my caliber is supposed to be, and I just think like it's a very like I need to always stop myself and stop looking at it like that, and reframe it, because like a creative block is kind of, it's frustrating, so it kind of helps to reframe it as an opportunity. And it's this maybe kind of lumps in everything we've already talked about, but like I kind of now when I'm in the right mindset to do this, I see it as an opportunity to do a really shitty pass. I'm like, oh, my brain is not working in the creative way that I want it to, so like I get to be an idiot now. I'm gonna switch to like doing the worst pass of everything.
Yes.
It's time to write that shitty first draft, prove myself right that like I am so bad at this. Let's go. Like let's do that crappy, rough drawing. This is your chance to be horrible at what you do. Like the creative block has like gifted you the chance to be terrible. So like that's how I kind of like, there are some really bad chapters that I banged out when I was in a rut, and I thank God I did, because they got those out the way and those were not used. So I guess it's like, yeah, just reframing it. It's an opportunity to be as bad as you think you are, to be as stuck as you think you are, and just create the worst version of what you think you're supposed to be making.
I love this so much. This is the first time I've heard it said it in that way. I love that like creative trash fire gremlin you unleash. I love that. This is super great. Because people often like kind of talk about it in a, like kind of like a negative light, where it's like, oh yeah, I guess it's the vomit draft, or like it's the thing that you're like, bleh. And it's like, but like being like kind of like channeling this more like kind of,
yeah, you get to be in on the joke. Like you get to be in on, you're writing it and you know it's bad and you're like laughing with yourself. I just like framing it as a bad thing or something you just have to get through is hard, because I find it easier to write towards something, like to see the positive. I find it easier to write or draw towards something versus seeing the negative. Kind of feels like you're trying to write or draw away from that, and that feels harder to do in my head. I know that's a very abstract way of describing it, but one of those is easier for me.
No, that makes a lot of sense. This is actually really, no, this is great, because you're putting the fun back into something that's really stressful and not fun. And I think that's like so smart, and it's the first time I've heard it said that way. So this is so cool. I'm like so excited that you said that. And on this amazing note, y'all, that will be the end of this creative block. Aminder, thank you so much for being our guest and sharing your story.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, I was so excited about this episode. I mean, I'm excited about every episode, but I was like, we could talk so much comics. And thanks to our listeners. Follow us on Twitter. It's at creative block without the creative without the vowels. And on Instagram, it's at creative block, creative without the vowels .block. Yep, we We tried, where we ask for drawing prompts and questions to ask our guests. Huge thanks to our editor Clemens for editing the podcast and Malik for helping us produce the show. If you love our show, then support us on Patreon. Becoming a patron gets you early access to interviews as well as bonus episodes. Click the link in the description of this episode. By the way, the money of the Patreon goes to our amazing team and all the like things like Zoom or whatever that we're paying. So like you're like literally helping us make the show. I have been your host, V. Keep being creative, and we'll see you next week. Bye.